which is not even a belief. It's a fact.
Right. That's one of the reasons I was laughing at that. Yeah. I mean, up until 5 minutes ago, everybody believed that, and now it's just kind of heresy. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
So you tell me when to start. All right. Welcome back to American Reconquista. I'm your host, Emilio Pons, and tonight I have the utmost pleasure of welcoming one of the greatest philosophers of this country and of our time.
Keep expectations low. Keep
Absolutely.
expectations low.
Somebody whose podcasts I follow religiously, pun intended, and whose books I've read, and who I think is one of the most valuable intellectuals out there, if for no other reason that he is able to distill his incredible knowledge and translate it into simple terms that most people can understand. And he also does this with an incredible degree of charm and grace that everybody can relate to.
I have to have you follow me around every time I'm not feeling well.
Yeah.
Every time I have the burdens of having you follow around, talk to me.
Please, welcome Peter Boghossian.
Thank you, Emilio. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So a little bit of background. I had a little fanboy moment when I met Peter recently at a salon here in New York City, in which he carried out one of these tapings of his thing, which is
Street
Epistemology. It was very, very interesting. And we struck a conversation back then. And then through the friends that organized that salon, I realized that he needed a place to stay. I said, absolutely, stay with me. I'd love to have you around and pick your brain. And I said, can you please be a guest in my show? And you agreed graciously. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me in your home. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's very kind.
So,
we had a great meal together.
Thank
too.
you. Yeah, it was amazing. And actually, I sort of regret that one wasn't filmed because it was so.
That was a great conversation.
Such a nice, flowing conversation with no taboos, no restrictions, no nothing, and it's exact type. Well,
we can still do that right now. Let's do that right now.
In front of an audience. So. I debated a little bit, even with you, how do I go about talking to one of the greatest philosophers and not miss my chance to talk about important topics that really have an impact on contemporary politics and every aspect of the culture wars that we are in the midst of. And I realized, okay, there are two things, broad topics that I want to breach, and then we can take it from there.
Okay.
One of them is the origins of our human moral intuitions.
Okay.
This is something that has always caught my attention. As you know, I'm an opera singer, but I'm a former lawyer. I finished my law degree, and my dissertation for law was not about any sort of practical aspect about the law, but rather a survey of the history of natural law philosophy in Western thought. Because already back then, and even though I studied at a Jesuit school, I knew, for me, the source of the law being natural law and this sort of moral intuition that comes from God just doesn't cut it. Because a simple observation of different cultures around the world, and even within the Western world, yielded contrastingly different approaches to the law and contrastingly different beliefs about what is moral, what is immoral, what is legal, and what is illegal. So that's one major topic that I want to talk about. And the other one is, for you as an epistemologist, whether we can know objective truth. First of all, whether there is such a thing as objective truth, and whether we can know it.
Okay.
So just as a...
Well, that's those are very easy questions.
Yes, very, very easy questions for a very short conversation. So just a brief summary for people who are unacquainted with the topic. If we distill the 5 major theories about the origins of our human intuitions, we would have first probably the oldest one that posits that our moral intuitions are divinely inspired, that we derive our sense of morality from divine authority. This is basically the premise that sustains every grand religion that we have, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and of course every other religion. The problem with this posture is that you run into the following dilemma. Basically, if actions are good only because God commands them, then morality could eventually become arbitrary. And in fact, you do see when you...
That's the Euthyphro dilemma, Plato's Euthyphro dilemma. Yeah.
Correct. And when you analyze different religions, you see that they are indeed all pretending to be God-based, but at the same time arrive to completely different and sometimes absurd conclusions. And then on the other hand, you have the issue that if God commands things because they are good per se, then you don't need God.
They're separate.
For
There's a kind of law independent of God.
Correct. Goodness is independent of God. Then the next large school would be the rationalist school that basically says that, and I'm really doing grosso modo, right? That our capacity for reason suffices for us to come up with the conclusions that we need to determine what is moral and what is immoral. But of course, we run into the potential problem that David Hume, for example, pointed out, that you could potentially have a being that has rational capabilities but no emotion, and that person would not have genuine moral sentiments, lacking this emotional aspect. As a result, or as a corollary of this, we also then have another school, which is moral sentimentalism, which basically advances the notion that our moral intuitions are the result of our emotions, our feelings, and our cultivated moral sense. And then you have the very, very important, for particularly in law, the social constructivism schools, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, or Hobbes or John Rawls, that basically advance the notion that our moral code stems from a social contract that people that constitute the members of any given community enter into.
I don't know if I put Rawls in there, but okay.
Yeah. But of course, this is very just a theoretical posture, because there's no society where people really at one point decided, okay, this is what our laws are going to be for good, and this is how we're going to organize our societies. The development of our laws and our moral intuitions has been gradual.
Just
disorganized.
The very fact that we can amend the Constitution shows that.
Correct. And finally, we have a more contemporary view, which is that of evolutionary biology as being the grounds for our moral intuitions, right? And that also shows, for example, that our moral intuitions are shared by our primate cousins, for example, that have certain degrees of morality and legal structure, even within their, well, not legal, but a moral structure within their highly advanced communities. So
yeah, and even then, people try to derive ought from is when they talk about Chris Ryan's work on bonobos or Jane Goodall's or Leakey's children on the primates, but there's no. Like, you can't say, dog sociality when they're in a dog park and they smell each other's butts, that's how we should greet each other. Please don't greet me like that. We'll take that off the table. But, that's like a not from an is. So I think that's a really good summary of the basic, again, like you said, it's
Right.
an overview, but
Right. It's an
good
overview,
summary.
but for one example from lab experiments that I like to think about constantly and refer to in conversation is that where you have capuchin monkeys in a
I'm going to say the fairness experiments. That
yeah,
we're saying?
exactly, in a cell, and capuchin monkeys like cucumber.
Yeah.
And so you assign a task for the monkeys to do, which is to pull a lever. And as long as both monkeys get the same reward for the same task, being a cucumber, then there's harmony between them, right? And then as soon as the experimenters introduce grapes, which they adore, and one monkey realizes that the other one is getting grapes for the same task, and well, he's still just getting cucumbers, then they start fighting. That, for me, it's pretty
Innate concept of
suggestive
fairness.
of exactly, an innate concept of fairness, right?
Yeah, researchers have done the same things with dogs too, and given some dogs larger portions. It really breaks my heart. I love dogs, but you then see that sometimes the dogs freak out if they. So it's that lends some credence to the evolutionary biological theories, unless you want to say that, well, no, it's really kind of God out there, but that's not really an explanation for the phenomenon. But it does. I think it lends some credence to the idea that we have innate concepts of fairness within us.
So, what is your actual conviction, if you have one, about this?
Of what specifically?
What is the origin of our moral intuitions? And why is it that our moral intuitions now are different to those of our forefathers 2,000 years ago?
Some are, some aren't. I mean, I tend, if I were going to choose among those schools, I would definitely be in the evolutionary and biological camp. I mean, evolution is really, it's such a phenomenal branch of study. I hope more particularly young people would study it. There are very few scientific domains that can answer philosophical questions. Why are we here? Well, we know exactly why we're here. This is so. I think that the hammer blows of modernity have softened for the most part. I mean, there are still like pre-medieval religions. I won't name them, but you can guess what they are. Some pre-medieval religions and practitioners. And again, anybody can live any kind of life that they want, provided they have cognitive sovereignty. Provided they're 18 and sound mind and body. But again, if I were to say any of those, I would say rationalism coupled with evolutionary impulses.
Okay. So then, laying the framework for the other question, which is whether A, there is such thing as objective truth, and B, whether we are able to know it or not. We have basically, throughout history, different schools that sort of correlate a little bit to the pendulum theory of aesthetics, right? Where you have in aesthetics, on the one hand, art schools that are aiming at representing reality as is, and then you have a big swing that represents reality in a completely stylized and abstract way, and that pendulum swings back and forth, or the same theory of pendulum swinging in politics and whatnot. You see a little bit of that when it comes to approaching the topic of whether there is a possibility to know truth.
Okay, so we need to really slow down, because the moment you start talking about aesthetics, you're talking about something else.
I was just drawing an analogy in terms of like the pendulum theory, right?
So okay.
In the history of epistemology, you have on the one hand those like Plato and the Stoics and the Rationalists, of course, and to some degree even the empiricists, who believe like, okay, yes, there is an objective reality and an objective truth out there, and this is how you approach it, or this is how we can, or the extent to which we can actually get to know it, right? So you have Plato with
Forms.
the forms, exactly, the ideal forms, and the analogy of the cave, and our ability to only grasp at the pure,
Shadows.
at the shadows, exactly, without necessarily being able to have a clear idea of the pure forms. The Stoics that say, like, okay, our rational capabilities are capable of, or give us a possibility to understand objective truth based on our alignment of reason with reality.
It's also a navigation strategy.
Right. And again, the rationalists like Kant that say, okay, well, our ability to reason leads us to discover truth as an imperative. And the empiricists that say, okay, the reality can be there, is there, and it can be discovered through experimentation and observation. And then you have the other extreme, which is the old Greek skeptic school that says not necessarily that there is no such thing as objective truth or objective reality, but that we just really cannot know it, that our reasoning capabilities are insufficient to actually know it. And of course, then you have more recently.
Yeah, you also have that not only that our reasoning isn't capable of knowing it, and Brett Hall and I have been engaged. He's the Australian kind of consigliere to David Deutsch and Naval, have been talking about this idea that are we limited by what we can know by our biology? Haldane has this quotation that Dawkins uses frequently: queerer than we can suppose. Is the universe queerer than we can suppose? I think that's one of the most interesting and important questions, of course, but very few other people find it as interesting I do. In other words, is there something, it's not queer, it's
Not in the sexual
yeah,
way.
but it's just weirder than
weird.
where we didn't evolve to understand just what happens in the quantum. It's just too weird for us to understand. So there's that limitations of not only our capability to reason, but we have these biological impediments that prevent us from understanding.
Right. And so then you have, along with the skeptics, more recently, the perspectivism of Nietzsche, for example, and then very, very drastically, the postmodern view of Derrida and Foucault and Lyotard and that say, like, there is no such thing as objective truth. There are only meta-narratives.
It's the differentiation is fine. That it's not that there's no objective truth, but it's that all truth is mediated through
our biases.
Yeah, class perception,
Right.
or like Helen Pluckrose calls it, applied postmodernist. She would say gender, sexual race, sexual orientation, race, or some other identitarian, something with identity level salient. So it's all, there are these filters, and we can never. There's something out there, but we can never know what it is because
our identity and our perspective always taints our ability to understand the truth or grasp it.
I don't like. The only genre of show I watch is science fiction. Every once in a while, something will come along that I watch that's not science fiction. But you ever watch Downton Abbey?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know how in Downton Abbey, they really focus not on the gentry and the nobility, but also just the people in the kitchen, the maids, and it was really interesting. It was a kind of perspectivalism, and I'm thinking about this because you mentioned Nietzsche. It was a kind of perspectivalism, like there was a truth to the matter. There's an abbey. There's a number of people in an abbey,
right?
But it was all mediated through, like, the way that one perceived this was contingent upon where they fell in the social hierarchy. So it's not that the postmodernists are wrong. There's some incredibly valuable insights in this,
right?
Until they go to Crazyville,
right? Right. Crazyville being what we've seen over the past
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah, and until they say that that's the only way that you can figure out what's true. Like you can't, you can't.
You can't rely on biology. You
Yeah,
can't
exactly.
Rely on
The tools of
observation.
science. Oh, and
can't-
biology is a real. I'm glad you said that because they're never attacking gravity or electromagnetism. It's always biology.
Well, until they do. Until they attack 2 + 2 is 4.
But yeah, they attacked
because
math
it's-
recently, and then
right.
and then I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to give him publicity. He said, and if I may pay myself props, I've been saying this for years. All these people are going to come out and say we never believed it anyway.
Oh yeah,
It's just so stupid.
Yeah.
And now, again, I don't want to mention his name because I don't want to give him publicity. But now he said, "Oh, I was just joking. My role as an educator is to just make." No, I mean they never, and that's the same thing that you're going to see with trans too.
Right. Although, I forget her name right now.
Helen Joyce.
Helen Joyce, exactly, has said in one of the interviews with you that
the parents?
the parents who trans their children are going to have to hold on to this notion that they were right, because otherwise they will be confronted with the fact that they did the unthinkable.
Yeah,
to
they
their
did the worst
children,
possible
the
thing.
worst possible thing.
Because when you really think about it,
gain
your-
brownie points
your only job as a parent, like you literally have one job. Have you heard that? Like you had one job.
to protect their children.
That's it. That's literally, if they don't thrive, well, okay, it's not great, but if you intentionally harm them,
Yeah,
that's the worst violation.
correct.
That's like inconceivably horrific. And that's what they've done.
Right.
So they can't admit to themselves that they've done the worst possible thing.
Right.
So they have to kind of stick to it.
They have to double down.
Yeah, and as evidence mounts and it comes in, it's almost at this point impossible for them to say wrong. To say I was wrong, I'm sorry. I mean, what are you going to do? You've mutilated your kid's genitals.
Right.
They can never have an orgasm. They can never have a child.
Right.
They're a lifelong medical patient, and you did that to them.
Right.
It will be a kind of cognitive dissonance, unlike any. There's no analog for it. There's just no. It's the worst possible thing.
I agree.
So that's why everybody who is fighting against this, Leo Sapir, Colin Hughes, Colin Wright, Mia Hughes, the list goes on and on. You know, Stella O'Malley, Travis Brown. I mean, the list is, and Helen Joyce, you mentioned. The list is endless at this point. People have fought. That's why they have to be particularly vitriolic and nasty.
I would say actually that extends though beyond trans to one of the other big threads that I've discussed earlier in my podcast and that I discussed in private with you, which is the Islamization of the West, right? The people who allowed this because they were in some sort of euphoric mania about diversity and the beauty of bringing brown people from hostile cultures that are antithetical to our values, that are now destroying our civilization and our cities and are bringing in nefarious traditions and whatnot, are going to only double down that they were right. They will integrate eventually, and we needed it and we deserved it, and all sorts of excuses.
So every time we have this conversation, I have to say the obligatory. I mean, I'm just so sick of it at this point. I've said it a million times, but I have to say it. Do not edit this out. Yes, we get it. It's not all Muslims. It's not even most Muslims.
Yeah.
It's not even a minority of Muslims, but it is a non-trivial number of people about which we have to not only worry, but who are hell-bent on destroying this very civilization which has adopted it. And so you have degrees of problems, right?
Right.
But as I've argued repeatedly, it's not too late for Western Europe to surrender.
Which is the point at which I almost choked on my food when we were having dinner.
Yeah, they still have a chance to surrender right now. They can pay the jazeera, the tax on non-Muslims.
Right.
And I would be willing, in fact, I'm looking for people to host this conversation with. I don't know exactly who they would negotiate with, but I'd be willing to negotiate on behalf of Western Europe for the complete surrender of Western Europe. And the other thing is, the sooner they do it, the better. They can negotiate a good tax on themselves. No, it's because the Overton window hasn't moved on this conversation yet. But the Overton window is going to move in 10 or 15 years. And like, oh my God, this guy Boghossian said this. I thought he was I don't know if I can swear on your podcast. I thought he's a fucking lunatic.
Yeah.
But now it's like 5 or 10 years later, people are now openly talking about whether or not there'll be I'm not going to say civil war, but wide scale civil unrest.
Yeah.
So negotiate a surrender now when the terms are good, and you can have, because Matt Goodwin has given the statistics, Eric Kaufman, Andrew Gold has had some fabulous guests where they've done the statistics. And I've been at the pro-Palestinian marches. I just don't think there's anything you can do. I mean, look, as I've said to you, I'm willing to change my mind that Europe should surrender, because I go around and ask people all the time, what would it take to change your mind? I'll tell you exactly what would change my mind. Stop the flow of illegal immigration.
Right. And
you're not going to stop the flow of
repatriate those who are already there illegally.
I don't even need that.
Antithetical to.
I don't even need that. You stop the flow of illegal immigration, and then I think you have a chance.
But see, now I will disagree. I don't think that stopping the flow of illegal immigration is enough, because they reproduce at much higher rates than we do.
But I don't even need all. But that tells me if they can stop the flow of illegals, that they have a will to do this. Mm-hmm. If they can't stop the flow of illegals, they don't have the will for what it. I think that they should cut themselves a deal now.
Yeah. The thing is that there's no way to trust that there is any good deal to be had. And
but we can let the Jews go. If you say, listen, part of the negotiation is you've got to let all the Jews go.
Yeah.
And you don't get to decide where they go. They just get to flee.
Yeah.
So then at least you can save, 4 million people, depending on how you slice it up?
Yeah. It's really a horrible scenario to observe, and I've been talking about this for decades.
Yeah, they're totally delusional.
They're delusional, and I've been cancelled. I've been
so don't negotiate.
Et cetera,
don't talk about negotiation, and you'll see what'll happen.
Yeah,
okay, great. I don't care. I don't live there.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad for him. I feel bad for him. I like him. Many of my friends are Europeans, but okay. And we'll see what kind of future you give your children. That's why, again, I don't want to belabor this, but you should be seriously talking about negotiating a surrender now.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think that it's a much more important thing to get people to finally wake up.
They're not going to wake up.
And to start with a.
They didn't wake up from the grooming gangs. If they didn't wake up because literally hundreds of thousands of preteens and teens are being raped and systematic. I mean, then you tell me what's going to wake them up. If that didn't wake them up, it didn't wake up the police who investigated because they don't want to be called racist. Okay, so if that does not wake them up, then you tell me what wakes them up. You tell me, I'm ready. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What's going to wake them up? Okay, so then, nothing is going to wake them up.
Well,
nothing is going to wake. Okay,
I mean, we've had
terrorist
attacks on a regular basis.
So then surrender. You tell me what the other option is.
Well, I think that eventually, I will say it. I think that there will be a point where there will be civil war.
Okay, well, again. And I don't think they can win that war. I mean, look, I would love to sit here. Look, I feel the same thing about Trump's tariffs. I hope I'm wrong about Trump's tariffs. I'm heavily invested in the market. I don't want to be right about this stuff. Nothing would make me happier financially in terms of my own livelihood if I were wrong. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what will happen in Western Europe. And again, I want to stress that the emphasis there is on the word Western.
Right, because Eastern Europe is doing
totally
absolutely
safe.
fine. They are
Poland, Hungary.
They are what the young Republicans here in the U.S. call based.
They're totally fine. They have nothing to worry about.
They have nothing to worry about.
Unless the Russians invade, which I don't think they're going to do. I guess they have a different set of problems.
Not going to happen.
But I don't think it's going to happen either.
Yeah.
But who knows? The future is hard to predict. So I don't know.
Right. So how did we get here?
Oh my God! What a question!
Yeah, I know. So, of course, we can look at the academic background of all these, right, and the theory and whatnot. But if you ask me, as a non-American that loves this country, by the way, and I have a lot of family here, and I will eventually become a U.S. citizen. And the reason why I'm here is because I see that in America, particularly under Trump, there is a will that just does not exist in Europe to fight back and to preserve our hard-won liberties, freedoms, and prerogatives, etc.
Yeah. it's an extraordinarily different historical and cultural context. But go ahead. Yeah.
And we're also separated by an
Big
ocean
ocean. Yeah, big oceans.
that really spares us. Even the big ocean was not enough to spare us from the 10 plus million illegal migrants.
Yeah, that was
Biden
the
and
former
Kamala,
administration
flew in.
and then they're lying about it too.
Right,
so.
right. And this is why it's so essential that Trump now finally gets the deportations done. But on a larger, simpler cultural scale, I think that this is a result of American attitudes towards intellectual confrontation. They are squeamish about intellectual confrontation, and they are so
Who's they?
nice.
Western
Americans,
Europe?
Americans, right? Americans tend to be so nice, and I think that Western Europe is now suffering from the effects that they imported from the U.S., from the theory. That
Oh,
they
not
imported from
only
the US.
Western Europe, the whole Anglosphere in particular is suffering.
Right,
And every English-speaking country is,
right.
just as we're digging ourselves out of this derangement syndrome, they're doubling down. Canada's bad, New Zealand's bad, Australia's
And
bad.
the UK is terrible.
The UK is bad. Every place. South Africa has a different set of problems, but the Anglosphere is in big trouble.
Yeah.
It's a neo-wokeism, and whatever we've done, whatever critical social justice is a neo-colonial export. And again, in the United States, it's not doing well at all.
Yeah. So again, how did we get here? I think it's because Americans hate confrontation, and we have allowed certain memes in the original sense of the word, as coined by Dawkins, right? Ideas that are transmitted from one group to another and then go literally viral. There are certain phrases that I would like to enumerate now that I hear constantly in this society and that drive me bonkers.
Okay.
So,
And I'd like to add to that list.
so number one should refrain from discussing politics and religion.
Yeah.
I think this is very bad advice.
I completely agree.
Right? You cannot say that, even if it's true. Right? The fact that this society tabooizes, if that's even a word, many difficult conversations that ought to be had, and says like, no, you can't discuss it. You can't talk about Islam. You can't talk about the relation to, God forbid, you talk about the relationship between IQ and ethnicity, or IQ and success rates. God forbid you talk about the higher incidence of crime in particular communities in the U.S., right, which are tenfold.
We know the data.
We know the data. So the other one, you cannot make generalizations, right?
Sure you can.
Of course
people
you
make
can.
generalizations
And
all the time.
You make them all the time, and nobody complains when you are making generalizations about positive things, right? When you say the Japanese are extremely mindful people, mindful of others and very respectful, nobody says, oh, Peter, you can't generalize. And when you say Mexicans are very friendly, also, nobody says you can't generalize. But when you say, oh, the Japanese are, I don't know, boring or square, or I don't know, there are many bad things that you can say about the Japanese.
I was just thinking,
right?
what would I say
Right.
about the Japanese? I couldn't think of one.
They will balk.
They're
But if you
overly
say-
clean, maybe.
Exactly,
we'll say,
or whatever, obsessive, I don't know. But if the instant that you say something about the Mexicans that is not nice, sort of like what I say all the time, Mexicans are lazy and corrupt and ignorant, and willfully so. People balk, right? And
I said
these are
I said something.
observable facts.
I said I was in El Paso, and I said something in my class once. I said I made an I statement. And this is 100% true. I have never met a Mexican who is not hardworking. That's true. Now,
I can tell you that. That's
okay.
not
Well, let
true.
me just say. Well, no, but it's true for me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in. So that whole expression "true for," there are actually times when that's a legitimate use of that. And these two Mexican women got up and they started screaming at me in the middle of class, and they started complaining about their husbands and this. And I said I was using that as an example of an I statement and the true for. So, but anyway, so you can't say, I'm going to add, you know what bothers me? The word community.
Let's get to it.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. But And I think that what we need to get to the point where we distinguish between generalizations and stereotypes. What we should not do is stereotype people and say, all Mexicans are lazy. Because I'm Mexican, I'm not lazy, right? All Muslims are terrorists. No, there are plenty who aren't. All whatever. All Japanese are organized, even not all Japanese
All
are
Ashkenazi
organized.
Jews are smart.
Correct. I've met some that are not, right?
I've never met a dumb Ashkenazi Jew personally.
Yeah. Well, some that hold at least dumb ideas. Let me put it that
Oh,
way.
well, that's, well, everybody does.
Yeah, everybody
myself
does.
included.
Right. So then another one that I just cannot abide by is you cannot claim that group A, whether that group is a country, society, ethnicity, religion, political party, sexual orientation, or whatever, is better than group B because X phenomenon which is prevalent in group B can also be observed in group A. So, for example, you cannot say that when it comes to corruption, Iceland is better than Mexico because there's also corruption in Iceland. Yeah, except that the percentage with which it is widespread matters a lot.
Right.
And it boggles my mind that people don't see this. Speaking with facts, right? Mexico, for example, has an impunity rate of 98%. 98% of all crimes in Mexico go unpunished. That's a mind-boggling piece of information. Now, if anybody were to tell me, there's also impunity in Japan or in Iceland or in Norway, I would say, yes, there is. But the fact that it's minimal by comparison to
rates?
Mexico matters,
Yeah.
right? If I tell you another different statistic that is also 98%, there's, according to Pew Research, there is 98% support for Sharia law in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, I wonder if that's true.
But
What
let's
are you going to do in a
assume that-
polling? What are you going to say no and they get taken out and shoot you?
But let's assume that the polling is correct, right? Based on that, it's a very significant number of people that support it, and it's an absolute majority.
Okay. All right. So let's explore something because and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So you correct me if this is wrong. You're largely against globalism.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you mean by globalism?
I mean the idea that there should be meta jurisdictions or meta state institutions that govern the entire world against the best interests of sovereign states.
Okay, so let's take the example of Sharia in Afghanistan and apply the lens of globalism. I would argue, admittedly, I will fully admit this is the most extreme example.
Right.
If anybody needs globalism, these people need globalism.
Except that it hasn't worked.
Okay, so
We've tried.
but the practicality of whether it will work or not, I have many ideas for that. But so they're creating societies that keep half of their population utterly immiserated.
Right.
They are, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, but why should I say it nicely? They're religious fucking maniacs.
Right. And they're the most primitive people in the world.
They're
stuck in the 8th century.
They
mentally.
want to go back to a pre-medieval.
Right.
So it would seem if anybody would benefit from, I forget exactly your wording, but meta institutions to try to undermines my word, rules, laws, etc. of the people. I mean, it just seems like there are some instances, and again, I'm fully granting this is an extreme example.
Yeah.
But there are some extreme examples in which certain groups of people would benefit tremendously from globalism.
Yeah, but I think that you are compounding globalism with Westernization. I have nothing against Westernization because I think that the West as a culture and as a set of ideas is the best culture that has ever existed in the history of mankind.
You'll get no argument from me.
With the largest number of freedoms, rights, prerogatives, the best and clearest sense of law, best organization for the state, etc., etc. So I have nothing against the Westernization, particularly of primitive areas of the world like the Middle East.
I'm glad you called it primitive, because
they are. What do you call? What if not primitive? Do you call a society that values women at half
population
the
and cloth
value
bags
of men
and beats them?
And stones them to death if they report a rape, but are unable to present for witnesses, and they blame them for adultery.
That's Quranic. So the testimony of a woman is worth less than the man. Right. The inheritance of a woman
as well is half
and so
that of a man.
The problem is that we have a large swath of people. This is such a complicated problem. Okay, so let's delimit this. So if the claim is that they would benefit from Western values, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we influence them? I had an idea once a long time ago. Instead of sanctions, we should have reverse sanctions. We should just give people all our music, TVs, everything for free. We should just drop in CD players, records, digital music, whatever it is.
I think that the only valid reason for which there is pushback against the Westernization of the Middle East, for example, is because the way the U.S. in particular has gone about it has been to sell the idea of bringing democracy to the region when in fact they were just pursuing economic interests.
I don't know about but I think
primarily.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you see over and over again instances where the U.S. gets involved in foreign countries, again, under the pretext of bringing democracy, and then they either have a very myopic understanding of the cultural dilemmas and cultural rivalries amongst tribes or whatever. And this is as true for Afghanistan as it was for Vietnam.
We saw that with Iraq, with Paul Bremer dismantling the army.
And you saw it during the Vietnam War, right? With Americans thinking that it was the Vietnamese fighting against socialism and communism together with the Americans, but in fact they were fighting the Chinese presence in their territory as well. And you also have all these, again, tribalism in the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that disingenuous side of the equation, and on top of that too, you have clumsy maneuvers like the precipitated and completely botched exit from Afghanistan, in which I'm sure that many...
That was an unmitigated catastrophe.
Correct. Many people who cooperated with...
That was one of the worst catastrophes, and that it's amazing to me that we just don't hear anything about it.
Right.
Military equipment. People we betrayed.
Correct. People we betrayed. So that's the reason why there is a pushback against the U.S.
Well, of course there... And I don't want to say there should be, but... We let people down. We betrayed people. Right. We told them we would help them, and they risked their lives, and then now they're dead.
Right.
Frankly.
Right. And also, I mean, let's not forget, a lot of these Islamists were originally used as pawns by the Americans against the Soviets, right?
Yeah. And that was the original Reagan's arms sales, right?
Right.
So...
or who brought, if not the West, I won't blame America, but if not the West, who brought the mullahs and the Ayatollah Khomeini into Iran? It was the West.
Well, yeah, and the Shah wasn't helping matters at all. But so yeah, I mean, there's a complicated history. There's a complicated history of the CIA and Allende in Chile. I mean, look,
wherever you look,
I'm not claiming that
has not worked.
Yeah. So if the idea, I mean, that's kind of a Chinese stance on the matter of sovereignty. I'm not a neocon, but I do agree with you in terms of the principles of the West. I also think that people need to they need to, in a sense, come to those conclusions on their own.
Yeah.
But if the United States does anything, it would be to kind of lubricate the mechanisms within society to help. So how are they going to come to that? Look, let's take a pause in the conversation. Just think about this. Our institutions for the last decade were held captive by maniacs in this country, right? And so people were terrified to speak out against clearly false things, completely idiotic things.
Right.
And nobody was killing them. The worst thing that happened to people, the worst, was they lost their livelihood. I'm not demeaning that. I'm not saying that's not nothing.
Right.
But nobody was out chopping their head off,
Right.
sawing their head off with a rusty butter knife. No one was out executing them, flogging them.
Right.
So how are these people going to dig themselves? So we need to be compassionate about the situation in which these people find themselves, because we couldn't. There were just a few brave voices who rose up against this madness.
Right.
So I do think that we have, I don't know, obligation might not be the right word, but we need to be at the very least sensitive. And, you know, there are so many geopolitical threats now. I was just in Taiwan a little while ago. Boy, the threat from China, I'm deeply worried about Chinese influence. I mean, we haven't talked about it at all, but I'm amazed, frankly, that more people are not talking about the AI revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to completely transform society within 2
Yeah.
years. AI agents by the end of 2025. I mean, that's another conversation, but
Yeah.
we're facing, I don't want to call them existential threats or black swan events, but we're facing so many problems right now.
But that is, I mean, we talked about it when we had dinner recently in private. That is a humongous existential threat, because it's not just that the people who are currently employed in the West in menial jobs will lose their jobs as a result of the AI revolution.
The laptop class, that's the problem.
They're going to be gone.
I'm toast.
Right.
You're likely toast. You don't want to admit it, but
know.
you're likely toast.
AI is not going to sing opera.
I
It's
know.
not going to teach you how to sing opera either.
I know you think that, but I think you'll be. I think you'll be. I think. And look, you don't work on a laptop, so let's delimit.
Yeah.
Anybody who works on a laptop, myself included, big trouble. Movie producer, like anything that can be. So I think
Replaced by technology will be replaced by technology.
Yeah, and I think I told you my dirty little secret that I'll never make public. One of the things I do is I have the Grok 3 app.
Yeah.
And I put it in story mode, and I have it tell me stories from different. I pull different science fiction characters, or have you in this voice, and I make it dark. I am blown away by how good it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the CEO of NVIDIA right now has, similar to Moore's law, and then every 18 months CPU power is doubling and price falling in half. He has a law that says every 3 months connectivity is increasing. AI connectivity is becoming exponentially multiplied, and that's compounded. So in plain speak, it'd be like double the power every 3 months.
Right.
That's utterly mind-blowing.
Right.
The fact that we're not having, that literally this isn't dominating every conversation, so we can pave an infrastructure.
Right.
So what are we going to do when we lose a mass class? I mean, do we need a universal basic income like my buddy Andrew Yang talked about?
What I didn't end up addressing is that we should not be worried just about those people in the US who will be replaced by AI. What do we do with the billions of people in the planet who haven't even caught up intellectually to the industrial revolution of the early 19th century?
And they're walking around with a device that has a PhD knowledge of literally, post-PhD knowledge of literally everything. But I'll tell you, in the conversation, what I'm really worried about now, that very few people are talking about, is that the energy grid in the United States is not up for the task. Now, if you say, well, it's hot, the air condition goes out, it's a brownout, whatever. It's not great, but it's not civilization. You're just going to be hot. Maybe if you're super old, if you have some comorbidity, you might pass away or something. And I don't mean, again, I'm not demeaning that.
Right.
But there is an existential threat, and the existential threat is China's energy policy. So the demands on the energy infrastructure for each AI, I've been reading about this. I'm new to this. This is outside my domain of expertise, but we're not capable of handling we don't have the energy infrastructure to handle but the Chinese do.
Yeah, but it goes beyond that. The Chinese have also, I don't know if you read the news recently, that it's been discovered that the Chinese have installed like
in the solar power and
in the solar panels, the ability to turn them off
Right.
From abroad.
Yeah,
this is a huge threat to our national security.
But why?
And it boggles my mind
Okay,
that
but
you
why-
cannot even talk about this because immediately some woke tart is going to tell you, well, that's racist. No, it's not racist. It's absolutely a clear threat to our national
Okay, but we just can't listen to these people. They have nothing substantive to add to any conversation.
Right.
They're relegated to the kiddie table to twiddle their thumbs and write fiction.
Right.
So even if you look at things like insulin production, we need to start moving, and Vivek Ramaswamy has talked about this, Joe Lonsdale has talked about this, David Sachs has talked about this. I completely agree with these guys. We need to start moving the methods of production. We have the distribution mechanisms. We need to secure critical infrastructure in this country, and we need to start producing, first and foremost, medical supplies.
Right.
And second, so I'm super bullish on solar technologies. I think solar and nuclear, I think, are the way out of it. Solar technologies are becoming exponentially more efficient, but the problem is you need large land masses.
Right.
So again, outside my area, but from everything I've read, each AI will need its own nuclear facility.
Yeah.
One complete nuclear facility, each AI.
Yeah.
Like,
but what
let that percolate. Think about how, like the regulatory apparatus. But that's the other thing is one of the things you see of people buying large land masses in the middle of nowhere, acrid, dry land.
Yeah.
And what are they doing there? They're buying them to put solar farms there. Why are they putting solar farms there? Because how else are you going to power the AIs?
Right.
I mean, I'm telling you, this is a sea change. It's a sea change in the way we. And I'm not talking in a 20-year horizon. I'm talking 2-3 year horizon. So we'll see. Oh, and there's also in schools now, AIs can tailor and custom. Did you see about this? Oh, all right. It's another conversation.
Yeah.
But AI is something that at some point we should definitely have a conversation about that.
Yeah. No, you should have it with somebody who's an expert on it. But anyway, then a few more claims that I hear all the time in American culture that drive me insane. So we touched a little bit on these, like, everything is relative, right? This one is one of my biggest pet peeves. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. No, they're not. Like, of course, I cannot prevent you from having an opinion in your head, but nobody is entitled to have their uninformed opinion be given the same weight as an informed, cultivated, fact-based opinion. This is one of the things that people don't understand, and it's a corollary, unfortunately, of the American obsession with equality. Right?
I'm not entitled to have an opinion about how we should fly a 747.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
And if you disagree with me, you can. That's not a hypothesis you'd like to test.
Right, and it's
if you're on the
it's
plane.
very simple, and again, it also all stems from the lack of proper philosophical education in the basics of philosophy. People are incapable of distinguishing, for example, between propositions that are universal and propositions that are particular, and propositions that are objective and propositions that are subjective. For example, a universal objective proposition is constitutions are legal documents.
Yeah.
Nobody can contest that. That's what they are. Constitutions are legal documents. It's not my opinion, your opinion. It's the Islamic view or the Jewish view or the atheist view. That it's a complete, absolute truth, right? Now, you can make it particular. The United States Constitution is the greatest constitution in the world. That you've already made it also
value
or whatever. You can then that's already by in and of itself also not just particular but relative, because you're imbuing there a value judgment. Who says that the American Constitution is better than the French or whatever?
So you got a bunch of things going on. It reminds me of a conversation I had with my dad when I told my dad we should teach epistemology in schools, and he laughed at me and he said, "We're producing people who can't read and write. What are you talking about? What are you going to teach epistemology?" There is something very profound to that, and we had also the discussion. What do you do with people? This Glenn Lowry and Peterson talked about this. People have been talking about this for years. People who have IQs under 81,
right?
They can't go in the military. At 10% of the population, so they can't fold a 8x11 sheet of paper in thirds and put it in an envelope. So you're talking about 1 out of 10 people. Right. So what should you? I mean, it's an ancient question. What should you be teaching people in schools? I think we'd both agree reading and writing, and I don't believe this idea that 100% of the people we can educate to be functionally literate. I just think it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It doesn't mean, that was the impetus, or part of the impetus behind No Child Left Behind in the Bush years and the subsequent educational policy decisions. But now that Linda McMahon has taken over the Secretary of Education and Trump is abolishing the Department of Education that came in 1979, it's going to go back to the states. So it's going to be really interesting to see what I'm a little concerned about that, frankly. I'm a little concerned because if we did not have so many crazy people, we could have a Department of Education. But because we have so many ideologues who are hell-bent on hijacking the system, we just can't have one.
Yeah.
We've proven that we're not capable of having nice things. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, a few more. I hate the let's agree to disagree, because I think that there is a command, I think, or a moral impetus to force other people to see the error of their ways and see how they are affecting not only their own lives, but the lives of the community by holding dumb ideas.
Yeah, I guess that one doesn't bother me as much. Let's agree to disagree. Because I think if you don't agree to disagree, that's when the nastiness gets in.
But to take some of your preceding extreme examples, well, not that extreme because it's a mainstream thing, but should we agree to disagree that mutilating children in the name of trans ideology is a bad thing? I think that when we are presented with dilemmas like that, we must be willing to fight tooth and nail.
Yeah, for sure.
Even against family members.
Yeah,
whatever it takes to preserve the integrity of the most vulnerable, which is the children.
Yeah. So I guess then we agree that you can't universalize that one, because I can think of a lot of things. Like I think intermittent fasting is good, or I think solar should play some role in the energy crisis. I mean, pretty beige.
Well, but those are really matters of taste. But so this draws us back to where do you draw the line? Well, you draw the line in when we're talking about profoundly moral or profoundly legal topics, where you cannot just agree to disagree. Because the more we give credence to the ridiculous notion that everybody's opinion is equally valid and that we can continue the race to the bottom, we are going to just self-destruct.
Well, we are self-destructing.
Yeah, but hence the need to not agree to disagree and push people's buttons, even if it pisses them off. Yeah. We need to get them to use their critical skills rather than just Netflix and chill. That's how.
I don't know if this is a thing. I don't know if those are mutually exclusive.
But I don't. In a sense, it is. I mean, I constantly run into this issue. People are like, "Oh my God, you're so intense," or like the young people say, "Like you're so extra." Right?
Oh, extra.
Well, I'm very extra. Why? Because I see our civilization collapsing in real time, and I see people not worried when there's a large fire and they're still whatever. Fumbling their fingers.
I think a lot of
unbelievable.
I think a lot of these problems. I mean, if you really think about what are the existential threats to our country in terms of like, if you were to hierarchically prioritize the biggest threats, I'll tell you what I think the threat is. You please feel free to push back. I think it's the debt.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't get the debt under control. You're not getting the border under control. You're not doing anything. You're not getting the military. You're not getting services. You're not having roads.
Yeah.
Have the highways. What are you going to do?
Right.
It's already. I mean, we could talk about the debt in detail. It's something I've been writing about and tweeting about for years. Up until Musk, in the last presidential debate, there weren't even a question about the debt. Right. And I love Doge. I think it's the greatest thing ever.
I agree too.
I couldn't. And you know what I don't buy? I don't buy these people like, oh, it only saved X amount of money. Who gives a shit how much it saved? What if it only saved $1? They're all volunteers. Right. What do you care?
Right.
I mean, if Musk was drawing, multiple millions of dollars, then we can have that conversation of which is right. that's taxpayer money. It's my money. That's your money.
Right.
So who cares if it only saves X amount of dollars?
Right.
Great. Fantastic. It brings some kind of accountability. And speaking of which, you know, it really upset me. I'm 58. I've been hearing the left scream about, and I agree with them. I completely agree with them. I've been hearing them scream about auditing the Pentagon.
Right.
For ever since, I can't even remember. The Pentagon should be audited. Everything should be audited.
Absolutely.
Everything should be held accountable. We need to know where this money goes.
Right.
We need to know.
Right.
This is a democratic system that we need transparency.
Right.
Bernie Sanders comes out and he's like, yeah, Musk and Trump are right. We need to audit the military. I'm like, okay, there's a man with integrity. And what does the left do? They go fucking crazy on the guy.
Right.
Traitor, cow. Like, you've been screaming about this my whole life. This is a golden opportunity for you. And you know what I would have done if I mentioned this to someone in Trump's cabinet, I won't say who, but I said, listen, you know, Cenk Unger and these guys are like, yeah, let's audit the military. I'm like, you know what I would have done? I'd be, okay, I'm finding 5 guys on the left. I'm going to find the most, they have to be sane, but I'm going to find, you know, like people with gravitas and credentials, and I'm saying, okay, you 5, and I'll stick 1 Republican on there. I want you guys to do the audit yourself. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, have at it. You do the audit, you present the thing to me, and if there's waste, I'll give you my word, I'm going to cut it. That's what I would have done.
Yeah. No, I agree. Couple more.
Yeah.
Well, this one is sort of the same. Like, how does person A believing X, Y, Z affect you? Live and let live. It's another one where I get, you know, it's Kriege sein Hals, we say in German. It boggles my mind, like, because it affects us. It affects all of us. And it can be sometimes something as pedestrian as like, why do you care if she's morbidly obese and, you know, still stuffing more McDonald's in her mouth? Well, you know what? Obese people burden the healthcare system and raise costs for everybody. So yes, your inability to control your appetite and to have the minimum amount of self-control eventually also affects me because I'm a member of the same society.
But a lot of people don't understand that. They don't understand that, like, you can drink Coke. No offense,
but I'm not 800 pounds.
No, true. But they don't understand the relationship. Okay, so let's linger on this because this is really important. So, as a general rule, I think it is not good for anybody to think about themselves as victims. As a general rule,
right?
However, there are people who actually are victims. And let me give you an example of who are victims. My dad was, funny, the second time he came up today. My dad had a little pot belly, and he tried to lose weight. And he went by the food pyramid guidelines. Uh-huh. The food pyramid guidelines are completely correct. It wasn't that he lacked will. Right. It's that he thought, you know, grains are on the bottom. Yeah, so he would eat as a snack from the basis, the best available evidence, which was not, it was all from the sugar industry. You know, he would have pretzels at night, these dried pretzels. Admittedly, they were delicious. But the point is, it wasn't that he lacked will. Right. It's that he really was a victim. He actually was a victim of systemically bad information. Right. And a lot of people, they just don't know that. Mm-hmm. And they see McDonald's is ubiquitous. They don't understand, oh, geez, maybe I can eat, you know, buns and breads and banana breads and no, you can't do. A guy I work with, Reed, he's you know, he didn't really know a lot of this stuff. He was putting sugar in his coffee, and then he starts hanging out with the 4 of us who have the identical diet. It's basically high protein. I don't do dairy. I don't do breads, sugars. Even when I get my favorite drink, Negronis, I get it with dry vermouth. But my point is, he started cutting back his sugar. He looks great. Looks fantastic. He did that on his own. Mm-hmm. But he is a super smart dude. Like, he's a legitimately smart guy. You saw him at Roy's party. Yeah. And so it's not that people don't know. It's not that people don't have the will. It's just that they think, oh, well, sugar in my coffee. Well, you could probably get away with that if you're 12. You know, nobody over 25 is getting away with putting the sugar in their coffee or having bread in the morning.
Well,
yeah.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. Well, again, you're not 500 pounds.
Yeah,
so,
true. True. And I promise to off myself before I
me too.
become a burden for society.
Me too.
And then finally, this is a little bit off topic. Is a big conversation, but oh my God, this one drives me insane. Yeah. Atheism is a type of religion. atheists only exist because God exists, which is something that Charlie
Atheists
Kirk just recently said,
only,
right?
well, I can see how that one could think it. If nobody believed in God, there'd be no atheists.
Correct.
Yeah.
True, but that does not prove the existence of God. That's
No, it does not.
right.
No.
It's an interesting remark. Period.
Yeah.
And the big one is that morality without religion is impossible, which sort of goes back.
I mean, I've
full
been hearing
circle
that
to
for
where
years.
we've been. So why? Let's actually delve into this one a little bit because it's very important. Why is it that it is a mistake to assume that morality without religion is impossible?
Well, you started the interview or our conversation by saying we have many different religions and many different moral codes.
Right.
So why would you assume that if you look at it, as John W. Loftus says, from outsider test of faith, from an outside point of view, why would one assume, if you were an alien, like let's say that there's life on Europa or something, they're living in the ocean and they come down and they see, oh, look at this. How would they adjudicate that? Like, how would they know which claim? So you already have claims among people who are fervent believers, and it's impossible to adjudicate between those claims. Now, I fully will acknowledge that the people who hold those beliefs don't think it's possible. But this is a key move, I think. This has helped me think about this a lot. Jerry Coynes brought this up. The evolutionary biologist brought this up. He uses Walter Kaufmann, the philosophers. It's not would a reasonable person believe this. It's would every reasonable person believe this? Well, the answer is obviously no, because there are a lot of reasonable people, and you present them with what you think is the best available evidence, and they just don't think it's available. I mean, I have no axe to grind about any of this stuff. I would believe any of it if I had sufficient evidence. I just don't have the evidence. Right. So I'm not like hell-bent on thinking it's all silly.
So if it's not God and if it's not religion, what is an objective parameter to drive not just moral intuitions, but legal ideas?
The legal ideas is a separate question. Like going back to your example of treating animals unfairly so that the others see when you give certain cucumbers or grapes or,
right.
I think some of those experiments, and those were carried out fairly recently as well. They gave multiple grapes versus one grape, and then I remember watching the video, and one of those monkeys starts going crazy in the cage. So clearly that has a sense of fairness, right? Clearly that creature, he's epistemically different from us. He doesn't even have language capabilities.
Right.
You couldn't possibly tell me that that's God.
Right.
I mean, I guess somebody could in a weird kind of way, but nobody could really argue. No one would that I would. It's just silly to say that.
Right. And in fact, many religions do claim that because animals lack consciousness, they lack morality, and they're like basically automatons.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So it's interesting. So if animals have a sense of fairness, then we could infer from that there are biological realities or kind of these evolutionary dispositions that have yielded certain cognitive capacities to understand domains of thought or jurisdictions of, this is unfair. This, I don't even a bonobo, whatever it is, this orangutan is getting 5 grade. So if you can say that, then it's a very small inference indeed to say that humans have it. Right. Humans just have the tools to capture those intuitions linguistically. We have sentence structures, languages. We make lexicons. We have definitions that refer to other words, so we can just capture those sentiments. Mm-hmm. So I never understand why people are so obsessed with this idea. The other thing that I find bizarre is people say to me now that woke is on hospice, people are asking me about.
I wish it were.
No,
it's not in my in my industry. It's very much alive.
Well, it'll be dead. It'll be dead soon.
Along with the industry.
Yeah, along with that's another. Yeah, I actually think it will, but maybe I'm wrong.
Not because of AI, but because of they're caving their own grave.
Yeah. Well, many have argued that we're on the cusp of superabundance. So, but anyway, that's another conversation. oh God, I lost my train of thought thinking about superabundance. Something Sam Altman said that all of physics will be solved in a very short period of time. That was the single most astonishing statement I think I've ever heard in my whole life. Like all of it, like time travel, warp devices, like phasers, like anything you could think of, like harnessing warm, Dyson spheres. Like we're gonna like really. But anyway, that's the AI conversation. Oh yeah, the God thing. So it's amazing. It amazes me the profound ignorance that someone would have to say something like, "Oh, you only believe that because you're an atheist."
Right.
Like nobody says that about people who don't collect stamps. Right? This guy over here, he doesn't collect stamps, so he doesn't believe anything. You can't make any inference about the fact that he doesn't collect stamps to the fact that any moral belief that he has.
Right, exactly. And that's what drives me crazy when people are like, well, atheism is like a type of religion. No, it's not. Atheism is a religion to the same, by the same token that, or to the same extent that silence is a genre of music. That
if someone wants to read about that, Russell Blackford has the Australian philosopher has a great piece that came out 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, 50 myths about atheism, and that's one of that atheism is a religion. I think that people can think about things religiously,
right?
But even in those senses, when you say atheism is a religion, they're using the word religion as a pejorative. Right. So those people themselves tend to be religious. It's like Frank Turek's, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Well, you're using the word faith negatively there, but yet you have faith yourself. So I don't know. It's an odd thing. I was just at the University of Austin recently, and I love those students. And they just kept peppering me with questions. So finally we did this Oxford-style debate, and people would come up and ask me questions. And lots of Christians, lots of Orthodox Jews, but our time eventually got cut short. But I have noticed critical social justice is dying, and people are preoccupied with these perennial questions, and God is a perennial question.
Right.
But maybe in a very short period of time, there will be questions, there will be answers to questions we didn't even know we had.
One thing that I found, because I was just rereading your manual for creating atheists, and one thing
a great book, by the way.
It's a great book, yes. One thing that I liked that I read in it is that you are, again, maybe this has to do with the fact that you have a very affable personality, but you have a charitable approach to people who are religious in the way that others like Dawkins aren't. To the extent that you even acknowledge that it is possible to convince somebody to question their faith and leave it behind, which is not necessarily synonymous with forcing them to leave their religion, because religion does provide people with a community and support that is necessary for, in many cases, for humans to strive, which is what I now believe is an important role of religion. I've softened a little bit my views on religion myself, just because I think that atheism is really just a privilege for the select few who can remain moral even in spite of a lack of deity dictating what's good or bad, and who will act in a correct and moral and legal way in spite of the lack of that deity overseeing our activities. But also because it does require a lot of brain power, and a lot of people just don't have it.
Okay, well, there's a lot there. So, Richard's Dawkins is very, I think we've done 4 events or something together. He's hard he's hard line in the terms of the macro level, but on the micro level, he's just very gentle soul. I don't know if he'd like me to use the word soul there, but I think that it's. I mean, God, these questions they're really perennial questions. They've been with us for so long, and people don't really know how to have those conversations. And so often, many people have softened about atheism because that's the substitution hypothesis. I've been fascinated by that for a long time. I don't know if I coined that or somebody else coined it. I don't really know. But the idea that as one religion goes down, people start believing other stuff.
Right.
So we better hope that we got to guide them toward a benign form of Christianity, or else they'll go to crazy town. Melissa Chen put on Twitter something that I forgot that I said, and it was, better to believe that a man walked on water than that all men can get pregnant.
And again,
people can't help themselves.
I agree.
They just can't help themselves.
Yeah, but again, this has to do with the fact that true atheism, correct atheism, requires a lot of intellectual prowess and moral fortitude, and a lot of people just don't have it. And then because there is always this
I would say verbal atheism does, because a lot of people, they have their doubts, but they'll never.
They'll never share them openly.
Yeah, Dennett writes about that. The former philosopher.
Cowardly, right? Yeah. And then you also see that this is also the result of the failure of liberalism, because liberalism has been misconstrued to mean that everybody's entitled to do whatever the fuck they want, pardon my French, and that is...
Is fuck French? It's the most English of words, but go ahead, please.
Yeah. And that is, their right. And no, it's not. Actually, true liberalism, for freedom to exist, we need to be able to rule our passions, to keep them in check. There was a Mexican president, Benito Juarez, who's the only indigenous president that the country ever had, and this was probably the only good contribution of Juarez. That and the secular state, which has a big contribution. But he said...
I've had some incredible meals in Juarez, by the way.
He said, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. So peace is respecting other people's rights, right? Peace will be there as long as the exercise of your freedoms does not impinge on other people's freedoms. And this is unfortunately something that we have completely lost track of in this society. You see here in this city that I mostly dislike, New York City.
I mostly dislike it as well.
Yeah. The most uncouth people behaving in the most primitive way.
I'm actually amazed you live here. I'm amazed really anybody lives here.
And feeling that they are entitled to do whatever the fuck they want. Yeah. No, you're not. The subway is not your living room. Yeah. Do not bring a speaker the size of a carry-on luggage and play rap and hip hop.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So the person who does that, do you really believe we're going to teach them epistemology? I mean, what is the likelihood that that person reads beyond a 5th grade level? 7th tops, very small, right? That they do math. So we have other fundamental problems. And I'm not saying we'll have some great Shangri-La if we teach everybody how to read and write. But I think there's a kind of educational literacy at its basics. And if we give people that, my guess is, by and large, the moral arc, it will expedite the moral arc's bending towards justice, Martin Luther King says.
First of all, I think we're once again compounding literacy with actual education, or rather education with civics. I think that it is imperative that we bring civics back into the conversation, because even stupid people can be trained like dogs to not be completely uncivilized.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because I could be wrong. Here's my current thinking. This E.D. Hirsch thing, like what every educated American should know, what educated people should know. Like there's a kind of canon. Conservatives love this idea. I love it too, for different reasons. But there's a canon of what people should know. And if we get people on the same canon, like if everybody starts learning about, Shakespeare, people want to decolonize. They don't want Shakespeare, read college, throw out Western, there's no Western civ, there's no, I think that you'll find the polity, I think you'll find a kind of, and I could totally be wrong about this, truly. I think you'll find that people will just be more civilized. They'll have the view that they have more in common because they have more reference points. I mean, television to a large extent homogenized language. When you go abroad, anywhere in the Anglosphere, they have American expressions, sayings, etc. And I'm thinking that, but we don't have a Department of Education anymore, or not just, I don't know how we're going to do that. But I do think that there are some indispensable pieces of knowledge and information that we need to teach people as constitutive of not only the educational process, but the consequence of that, which is to produce robust democracies. And now, again, I think we've failed. I think we've bartered, in a sense, we've bartered math, reading, and writing for gender madness. Yeah. People can talk about pronouns. They can, and my kids, when my kids went to school, look, the civil rights movement is super important. No question about it. They should absolutely be taught that. MLK, the whole deal. But that's not all they should be taught about. Like, that's every history. Like, that was it. That's all they got. Right. So, of course, you're going to see America as a skewed, systemically racist place with a bunch of white crazy people running around who are guilty, and that's going to manifest in the air. That's the other thing. There's no such thing as a private belief. Like, if you honestly believe, if you've been indoctrinated into this stuff for years that white people are intrinsically racist, you honestly think that those people are just going to somehow compartmentalize that, and that's not going to bleed through to their actions.
Correct.
Who believes that? That's totally crazy.
Yeah.
But
and this has real life or realpolitik implications. You know? And you see the uptick also in crime, for example, and racially motivated crimes.
But that's another thing we can't talk about. And every time you say that, people lose their minds. Yeah. Okay. Well, the white liberals in particular, you can lose their minds, but the consequence of you losing their minds is they're more dead black males.
Correct. So
they don't really give a shit about dead black males. They just want to have some preservation of the perception of virtue sanctity or whatever they want to. Right. They want to. It's Rob Henderson calls that a luxury belief, and it is a luxury belief. Right. So there just have to be people. You just can't listen to these people anymore. I mean,
But does it suffice to just ignore them, or do we have a moral obligation to fight tooth and nail against them in the public arena and shame them?
I mean, you just ask what. So the problem is that they don't understand, and this is what I think many conservatives don't understand, is that these people don't understand that you have to marshal facts and evidence for a conversation.
Right.
Like, you just can't say, well, I feel in my heart that if the police, I don't know, were rose petals. I mean, you can't make shit up.
Right.
Like, you got to have data for the things you believe, and then you present that in as clear of a way as possible, and then and it is messy, and people will have conversations about it. That doesn't mean they're existential threats to the society. They may be existential threats to the society, but democracy is messy, and then we formulate public policies based upon the best available evidence.
Right, but if we can't even have these conversations because people are immediately offended and calling you a racist, and what do we do?
Well, we have more dead black men.
Yeah.
That's what I know. It could be argued that's what ultimately they want.
I think that a lot of them do it for social cachet.
For sure. But
points.
If they really cared about dead black men, if they really genuinely cared,
right,
then what they would do is they would do something to sacrifice their own virtue signaling.
Right.
They would say, we have to have a conversation about black on black crime. They would say, we have to have a wide, and then conservatives would also have to say, listen, a lot of these problems have been on people. This conservative idea that people can just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps is just not true. If they could, they would have done it already. So we need to provide opportunities for people. John Rawls mentioned this. You mentioned Rawls. I've talked about this. Mm-hmm. It is my belief that everybody should be afforded a public education at the first rate. I think we need to go above and beyond. Look, I came from a bookish family. My dad was an engineer. My mom worked at medical offices. I had somewhat of an advantage. Many of these people come from broken homes, drugs, like actual drugs, like crack and meth and such, bad drugs, white drugs. These kids, they're not even getting breakfast. So it's not only providing everyone an education of first rate. I think we should have great cafeterias in our schools. And yeah, someone's going to have to pay for it. But the more you do that, any disparity of outcome cannot be blamed on the system, because there is something now to this idea that there is a systemic inequality. It is a systemic inequality along the lines of wealth, and more Asian people and Ashkenazis happen to be more wealthy than blacks.
But also Nigerians happen to be wealthier than whites.
I'm not sure. I think that's that's somewhat of a myth. I think Shermer debunked that. I think that they're more wealthy than other African Americans, but I think, Amy Chu in The Curse of the Tiger Mom lists these, and I think some of those have been debunked. But if you look at it,
Indian Americans do pretty well, and they're pretty dark.
Yeah, okay, they are dark. The idea was that there's a kind of legacy of slavery where people didn't have the opportunity to get. I mean, look, it's placing me in an awkward situation because I don't actually believe this, but I'm telling you what they believe, that they didn't have an opportunity to generate wealth, and therefore other people have an advantage. The problem with that argument is that other people didn't have an opportunity to generate wealth. Right. So then you have to blame it on something else.
And then also there are plenty of people, sorry to interrupt, but I grew up on the green side of the fence, right? And I went to a school where all the posh people sent their kids to.
I love that word, posh.
Yeah.
I love that word, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I saw also plenty of examples of very rich people destroying their family fortunes because they were lazy and stupid.
Yeah.
That also happens. Like, people never talk about they're always talking about the lack of upward social mobility, but they never mention the fact that there are plenty of people who are born into privilege who lose it because they squander it.
My mentor explained that to me. Why that is. The reason is that there are, it's kind of like what Toynbee said about the family. There are many ways to be a dysfunctional family and few to be functional. There are many ways to fail, but few to succeed. My mentor used the example of, you could have high IQ. That's why high IQ isn't a guarantee of success. You could have a high IQ, and he said, and you could shoot heroin behind a dumpster.
Right. So
it doesn't mean you won't do stupid things or foolish things. But my point about attacking I'm not saying every conservative believes it, certainly not, but that you need to create opportunities for people to succeed, right? You can't just assume that someone's going to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps.
Even if it does happen, though.
Yeah, it does happen, but if
there are statistical outliers, is that what you're saying?
Sure, but if that were the case, then it would be like a pointillism painting. It'd be like this person was poor, but then over here, and then all these people who grew up in a poor system, this person's a billionaire banker. But it doesn't. They're clustered. They remain in clusters in their income distributions from their birth parents, and usually they're single parent households. So we have a complex. And then we also have, I usually talk about the problems with the left. It's nice to talk about some of the problems with the right. We also have a bunch of lunatics on the left right now. This is not like the left of yore. This is not like the Noam Chomsky left. These people are just crazy.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So, because I don't want to take all your evening, and even though our conversation could continue for a while, and I hope it does, I want to try to start heading towards the finish line.
Yeah.
What do we do with all these people who are beyond redemption? And how do we pull ourselves out of the mess that we've created and save our civilization?
I don't believe anyone's beyond redemption. I mean, I have talked to, the only exception to that is people who are classified as criminally insane. But I've talked to so many people who have...
You did a lot of work in prisons.
Yeah. They've turned their lives around. I've talked to people who have, been shown an act of kindness and that set them off in certain trajectories. There's a guy, Neil Harbinson, suffered terrible depression and addiction issues, and now he saves dogs in Thailand. I don't think anybody is beyond redemption. Everybody has, because that's what reason affords people. It affords people actual hope as opposed to illusory hope.
And if this is the case, then why is it that even with billions of dollars, and I'm being cheeky because I know why, corruption and whatnot, self-preservation of the bureaucracies in California. But why is it that in spite of throwing billions of dollars at this problem, for example, we are unable to help some of the most irredeemable, in my opinion, people like the homeless in California or New York?
That's an easy question. I like easy questions. So let's take a look at the homeless. We know Schellenberger, San Francisco, Michael Schellenberger, phenomenal book. We know the solutions to this. This is not rocket science. It's shelter first, housing earned. Like, we know it. Shelter first, housing earned. So you have to incentivize sobriety. You can't just give people houses because then they'll go in houses and they'll shoot heroin.
Right.
So, but every American, in my opinion, deserves a shelter. We can't have people laying in the streets.
Because it's a nuisance for those of us who are not in the streets.
Well, yeah. But this idea that you're somehow going to provide them tiny homes and everything's going to be fine, but it's a fantasy.
Sure, but then what do you do with those who are offered the opportunity for free housing, are offered the opportunity to go into detox and whatever, and still
that's
refuse and go back to the streets?
Okay, well,
do you finally get to say we should arrest them and have no compassion for them?
Well,
because
no,
that would be my take.
That's a separate question. It depends what they're doing. I mean, if you've looked at the outside my area, but if you look at the breakdown of where the vast majority of people, and I'm also thinking about Portland, where I used to live, petty crime is a source of their income.
Crazy.
It's a cesspool of filth, violence, despair. I'm so happy I left it. I hope they utterly destroy the place now. The library. No, I do. I hope people get in a democracy. You have to be responsible for who you vote for. Right. And so the current president of Portland State University didn't arrest the people who destroyed the library. Keep in mind, Portland State is a public school. $1 million in damages. Well, the taxpayer pay for it. But you know what? Fuck them. They should pay for it. Yeah. Because the president of the university is still there. She wasn't held to account.
Same goes for Harvard, Columbia.
Those places are cesspools. I had an interesting conversation with a guy. It's going to come out pretty soon at University of Austin. And this is, remember in the fires in LA? And I basically said, it's a really interesting conversation. I basically said to this guy, I'm like, look, who are you to say that the purpose of the LA Fire Department is to put out fires? You don't live in LA. They believe that the purpose of LA Fire, if you read, I don't know if they might have changed it now, but when you read their mission statement, it didn't say anything about putting out fires.
Yeah.
It said diversity, equity. Yeah, and they had a large lesbian woman in there, and they have well, okay. Do you live in LA? No. They don't, clearly they're telling you it's in their mission statement what the purpose of the fire department is. So if you have a problem with that, don't live in LA. Yeah. And if you live in LA and you have a problem with that, don't keep voting in the same people. Right. But if you do keep voting in the same people and a good percentage of your city burns,
don't complain.
Yeah, because you got diversity. You got what you wanted. So who the fuck are you to complain? Right. So you have to be responsible for your decisions in a democracy. That is what you do. And if you don't like it, move.
Yeah, and not just a democracy. This is a take that I have in general. Like when people tell me like, oh, but the poor children of Gaza. I'm like, okay, fine. Children under 8, okay. There are plenty of those who are already, capable of putting sentences together, and their first sentences are "kill the Jews" and horrible ideas, right? But more importantly, the adults in Gaza had the opportunity to turn that plot of land that was given to them in 2005 by the Israelis.
What do you think of Trump's idea?
They had the opportunity to turn it into Hong Kong or Singapore or whatever.
What do you think of Trump's idea, though? He wants to turn it into a big resort.
Let me get there. But when they complain about genocide, first of all, there's no genocide. Absolutely not. That has been debunked several times. And nobody should be believing the statistics provided by Hamas, please. But they had all the economic resources and all the structural and legal and democratic resources to choose a better future for themselves. Instead, they willfully and freely chose and voted in Hamas. And they supported their activities. It's like what we saw on October 7th was not just a bunch of terrorists from Hamas committing atrocities. We also saw the people on the ground celebrating them and participating in these atrocities, right? And gleefully cheering and egging each other on to commit the most heinous crimes that would make the Nazis blush. If they're now being obliterated, sorry, they made their bed. They can sleep on it too. This is my take on it. Honestly,
Yeah,
I feel bad for the children.
That's
for the
way
adults,
outside. That's a way outside my area.
Yeah,
I can't relate.
Yeah,
I don't know nothing.
But I mean, this is my take in general with people who choose to behave in completely antisocial or
here's the
completely
difference.
primitive ways. It's like,
There's one difference.
Live with it.
If you don't like the who you've elected in Gaza, you can't move. But if you're unhappy with the LA Fire Department, you can just move to Marin County or something. You can move out. It doesn't have to be there, but you can move out of LA.
True, but the problem is also that a lot of what's happening right now is that a lot of people who are moving away from New York or from Chicago or Los Angeles to Texas or Florida because they're fleeing the nonsense are very happily just reproducing the same ideas.
Bowling Alone is a great book about that. I wish I wonder if I were a better person, if I would have more compassion for the people who voted in the people that who allowed the city to burn down. I just don't really have any compassion for them.
Right.
I mean, I just don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Why didn't you demand why didn't you stop it?
Yeah.
I mean, you knew this shit is insane.
Yeah.
And you voted for her anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're out of luck. Next time, be more responsible with who you vote.
Correct.
In your voting.
And stop voting based on your feelings and empathy. And
I guess who I feel bad for is the people who voted for sane people, and then they lost their homes and their friends lost their homes.
Yeah. Which leads us to a different conversation that for some other time, which is the dangers of democracy. Even the original Greeks who came up with it understood that democracy can very quickly lead to the tyranny of the masses.
That is a conversation for another time, because they're banning parties in Europe. They're banning parties in Romania. Yeah. They've talked about it in Germany.
AfD. In Germany,
exactly. So that's another question. What are the limits of democracy? I mean, in this country, we have a constitution that puts states can't just make certain rules that go against this constitution. I don't know how many international viewers you have, but an international audience often doesn't understand. Like, we have the First Amendment, and so, Manchester County or something, you can't, in England, you can't just say, well, we're just so we have a different legal structure in this country, and so the politicians are bounded by the Constitution and the separation of executive, judicial, legislative. Mm-hmm. Separation of powers.
Right. Yeah, checks and balances is what.
Yeah.
What you were looking for.
So I do think that in the United States, the problem or the question of banning parties, et cetera, is very different from other countries.
And yet you nearly had it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people.
I mean, they didn't try to just ban the Republican Party or Trump's MAGA movement. They literally tried to kill the guy twice.
Well, I was also thinking about so if somebody, I don't mean to demean an assassination, especially of a presidential candidate. So I'm not doing that at all. I am saying that the institutionalization, specifically 31 people lying about the Hunter Biden laptop, and they knew they were lying.
Right.
They knew they were lying.
Right.
That, to me, I don't want to say, because again, I'm hesitant because I don't want to demean the assassination, but there's something grotesquely conspiratorial.
Right.
There's something grossly abusive about the public trust.
Right.
There's something, and again, I'm hesitant to compare it to the assassination, but there's something, I don't want to say, I kind of want to say worse, but I don't want to say, there's something that bothers me.
The result of those elections.
Yeah.
If the Hunter Biden story had gone viral, as it should have, he would have lost.
And everybody's saying it's a conspiracy, it's this, it's that. I don't know. So again, obviously I should come back and we should have those conversations,
Yeah.
specifically about democracy, China. I don't know if you've been to China recently, but
I've never
it's,
been.
oh, really? It's interesting. Their cities are rather remarkable. Their crime rate's low. You can walk around. I'm about to go to Eastern Europe. I'm always amazed when I go to Eastern Europe. Last time I was in New York, some guy was pretending to be a SEAL or something, going up and down this. I take the subway everywhere. Haven't, because I hurt my knee now the last few days. But I'm always amazed when I go to foreign countries. It's like, oh, you wait for the bus, you get on the bus, you get off the bus. There's nothing crazy that's going to happen to you.
Right.
Like, no one's going to push you into, you're not going to see anything crazy.
Right.
No one's going to defecate on the platform. It's just like, how civil society view public transport.
Singapore. Have you been to Singapore?
No, I've been to Taiwan, and
Singapore is incredible.
Yeah, I heard that was incredible.
It's heaven on earth. And people are like, oh, yeah, but it's a fascist country. What do I care? I mean, honestly, I'll trade fascism for a perfectly functional, civilized, clean, orderly,
Yeah, it's
and safe
probably though,
society.
because you and I don't live there. I mean, it might be different, but when I go to places, I'm always struck by the efficiency and the cleanliness of the places, and the lack of crazy, insane shit and crazy people doing crazy things.
Right.
I'm always struck by it.
Which also I don't understand why New Yorkers in particular feel so proud about this aspect of New York, how crazy it is. You shouldn't be proud of this. It's utterly dysfunctional.
Yeah. I was in tap and pay.
Yeah.
Everything. I was shocked that in Seattle, I just came. I was giving some talks in Seattle. I was shocked that they didn't have tap and pay. How can you have tap? How can you? How many people? Millions of people. You're telling me like a tourist or someone can't just go and put their phone or credit card and walk through? You got to get a ticket. You have to have a paper ticket, and then someone came and checked my paper ticket. What is this, like 1980? That's crazy.
1930, yeah. But crazier is also the fact that there are so many people abusing the system and breaking every single rule, and nobody bats an eye. It just.
I don't know how you live here. I mean, I am flabbergasted by the prices here. I'm just shocked. I've been spending you should come down. I spent last night, I went with Coleman Hughes and my buddy Noam and another friend of mine. We had a fairly reasonable dinner. It was $2.99. It was $2.99, and I left a 25% tip. You could go out in Hungary, and literally, you could 5 times the number of people. You could have a feast with the finest bottles of wine.
Yeah.
So it's a very expensive place. I'm not really. It's small. Your house is gorgeous, but it's in general the houses are small. It's I don't know. I mean, I understand this is a hub and wherever people things happen. I personally could not. I don't think I could live here long term. I just
me neither.
I lived here in the early 90s.
Yeah. The only reason why I moved to New York is because I was
career, singing.
No. I was absolutely sick and tired of paying taxes in Germany to see them squandered in stupid socialist ideas, radical environmentalism, and the tax-sponsored Islamization of the country. I was
Okay, well then, go to a place that has a high, especially you don't have kids, right?
No.
Okay, so go to a place that has a high sales tax, because you're not buying much stuff, and no income tax.
Right.
That's what you should do.
Yeah, but I had to also be in a place that is somewhat conducive to having a career in the arts. And unfortunately, the arts are not something that is particularly strong in this country at all. Even highly educated people in this country have a very limited knowledge of or even exposure to the arts, which is something that I'm absolutely
but see, that's
attempting to change.
Okay, see,
and
so that's
where do you go?
Okay,
I'm going to go to Florida. I'd be very happy in Florida.
There's
nothing. What I'm going to do?
It's a desert,
exactly.
an art desert. That's what I mean. Yeah. In addition, but that's I guess that's the question. Like, let's say you can only choose one, and don't try to cheat the question. You have a choice. You can give kids not an exposure to art necessarily, but a love of art through exposure. Like, you can help instill that as a value, but the consequence is that they their reading and writing levels are what they are now. Or you have this kind of Chinese model with the Gaokao, this test they give. You have this Chinese model, and they read and write very well and do math fairly well, but they know nothing about the arts. Which would you choose?
You told me not to cheat, so you gave me two
You can
options,
only choose
but
one.
You gave me a false dichotomy.
Yeah, well, I know, but those dichotomies show what you value more. It's a way of asking what do you value more.
Right. So because I value civilization more,
you'd say
I'd go with the Chinese model, except that I would then say, actually, the arts are thriving in China, and in particular, classical music, for example, which is absolutely my field, is doing so much better in China than it is doing here.
Oh, I did not
because
know that.
there is a huge reverence for the Western output in classical music that is simply just not here. So that's why I can actually have the best of both worlds. Some of my best students are Chinese. Some of the most industrious, disciplined.
Oh yeah, I met one reading.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not one; it's many. And China, for example, has built several opera houses, dozens of opera houses over the past decades.
You know, when you go to
whereas here they're closing down.
In China, when you go to a sports event, I don't speak Mandarin, maybe 5 words, but if there's a principal in the audience, on the loudspeaker they'll say, welcome, whatever, Miss Doctor, whatever, so and so from as a like that's wild. Like that's a cultural value that. Could you imagine that in the United States? You're like at a football stadium or something, and the Mets or I don't even know any football teams. What are the Dallas Cowboys and?
Don't look at me. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I know nothing about sport, but I do know that they don't announce the principals who are in the audience.
Right. Yeah, it's a completely different level. So I actually, just to say goodbye to this conversation, I think that we have to also bear in mind the possibility that we need not so much of a push for Westernization of the world, but we have plenty to learn also from the East, particularly from Japan, Korea, and China. I wish in many respects that we would learn more from them.
I couldn't agree more. And we allow that stuff to come into the canon of knowledge, not because they're Chinese, but because there's a there there. There's something beautiful and powerful about that has withstood 5,000 years or X thousand years.
And the same goes actually also for the snobbish attitude towards Western European culture vis-a-vis Eastern European culture. As you know, I started my professional career in Russia. I'm a huge Russophile. I speak the language. I'm always surrounded. I always say I'm the happiest I can be is when I'm surrounded by Russian Jews. Like this is my tribe.
I'm trying to think if I know any Russian Jews.
And because again, they blend together conservative traditional values with an appreciation for everything that is connected to intellectual and cultural and artistic affairs. This is my tribe. I'm so happy amongst them.
Okay.
Right? But like you were saying before, when you go, I sang many times in Poland. It's the real Europe. It's the real deal. Europe before globalization.
Yeah,
Poland
and Hungary
Europe
in
before
Islam.
Hungary is also beautiful, and people are like, oh, but Orban. Orban is doing what's best for his.
Well, the Hungarians they're fined $1 million a day because they don't let migrants in.
Right.
No, maybe not euros. I think. Yeah, they're fined $1 million euros a day. Excuse me.
Right.
Well, I mean, they made that calculus, right?
Right.
They made that calculus. We don't. But I also think that's unfair because LA County has 10 million people in it. Hungary has 10 million people in it.
Right.
Ukraine, after the war, more than 1 million Ukrainians are either in. It's hard because we don't know exactly how many people there, but either have gone through or are currently there. So this idea that you don't take refugees, it's just factually incorrect.
Right. You just don't take the wrong type of refugees who are not even refugees, by the way.
Took Ukrainians, and many of those Ukrainians were ethnic Hungarians, and many were not.
Right.
So, what is it, 640,000 people fled Syria. And again, one of the frustrations I have is, I've had people on the show to talk about Islam and to talk about conflict. And every time I say, well, I'd like to see, I'll say to the guy, well, who should I have who disagrees with you? And then I'll try to get people. Now, we've asked some Islamic scholars to come on the show and to have that conversation about it. But my guess would be it would be easier to get somebody. So think about this for a second. We have had I say we as if I'm European, but the Europeans have had. You're European fundamentally.
I'm German and Mexican. I'm a dual citizen, but I spent all of my adult life abroad.
Okay.
And my conscious life, I spent it in Germany. So
okay. So you have Angela Merkel. You have, you could go through the Tony Blair in particular. All of these people who have ushered in millions of, here's the keywords, unskilled young Muslim men.
Of fighting age.
Unskilled, young, young.
And fanatical.
Young is not all fanatical, but so, and you mean to tell me that we can't find a single person, not one person, to come on and defend this idea? And I'm not even going to go at him hard. I'll throw him some softballs, but I'll ask tough questions too. I just want to figure out, what were you thinking? Did you think that they would secularize and...
Oh, that's literally what they think.
Well, why don't they tell me that? But see, this is... okay, hold on. This is important. I'm going to interrupt. No, I have to interrupt you. This is very, very important. Yeah. This is what happens on NPR. Yeah. And I don't want to create this dynamic. Yeah. The dynamic is, on NPR, which is a far left identitarian cesspool, when they want to figure out what somebody on the right believes, they ask somebody on the left what someone on the right believes. I don't want to replicate that dynamic. No, I don't want to say what do these people believe? And then I'm asking someone on the right I want to know from.
No, I'm going to provide you an answer. Okay. Actually, you can interview him.
Somebody?
Yeah, my former partner in Germany. He and I actually split primarily over politics. We have many
does he have
issues.
Does he have a credential? Is he a policymaker?
Yes, he's mayor of the town where we used to live, and we completely went our separate ways because he is.
Does he speak English?
Yeah, he speaks very good English.
I'd love to have him on the show.
Have him on the show.
100%.
His name is Falco Hönisch. He's the mayor of town, the small town where we lived, St. Goar am Rhein.
I'll take it. That's fine.
He's a member of the SPD, right?
Okay, so, and he's pro-immigration. He's pro-Islamic immigration.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk to him. I would love to know what he was thinking.
Because he thinks that, you're just a radical, crazy, whatever, pro-Israel, pro-Jewish people.
I'm not Jewish. I'm not Jewish.
No, he can't
say that.
Right.
He can't because I'm not Jewish.
I'm just crazy, and that I'm radical, and that I used to be fun and nice, and I'm now just an asshole. I had this conversation so many times with him. The problem with these people, like my former partner, is that they take. This is a fallacy, right? They take a little small sample of people. And they think if my friend Ibrahim and my friend Omar are nice people, that means all Muslims are nice people. Or if my friend Ibrahim and my friend Omar were able to
I'm not talking about Ibrahim. Right. I'm not talking about Omar.
I'm talking about the ideology. I'm not even talking about the Muslims. I'm talking about the culture and the ideology.
Well, and I'm also talking about the admittedly small, but definitely, so let's get him on. I'd love to have a conversation with him.
Yeah. But by the same token, I'll tell you some of my experiences with him. Basically, to spite me, he volunteered to be the executive director of the so-called Syrian Expat Orchestra, right? So a bunch of Syrian musicians. So when we are talking about Syrian classical musicians, we're already talking about crème de la crème, right? We're not talking about...
I can already tell you I'm not worried about Syrian classical musicians.
Right.
Worried on a 1 to 10, I'm worried 0 about Syrian classical musicians.
Exactly. But at the same time, I had the opportunity to talk to many of them, right? Because he really rubbed it on my face. I'm going to bring these people that you hate, and I'm going to make it easier for them to live in Germany and to integrate and blah, blah, blah.
He thinks you hate the Syrian classical musicians.
No, he thinks I hate them because they're Muslim. And what I hate is Islam. And this is a very difficult distinction for him to understand. And it's one that boggles my mind coming from a German, because we are, as Germans, required to hate Nazism, even though we all know that not all Nazis were murderers.
Yeah, not all. Okay, so that's a broad stroke with Islam, because there's Indonesian Islam, Muslim. I mean, okay, so let's take a step back, and then we got to wrap it up pretty soon. So when you met these people, what happened?
So when I met these people, what happened? I asked them, flat out, why are you here? How did you get here? Yeah. Right. So some of them told me like, oh, well, we used to play in the orchestra in Damascus. Damascus was never really in danger because that was where Bashar al-Assad was. Yeah. So they were never really targeted like in Aleppo or other places. Right. And they said we saw an opportunity to go to Germany under the pretext of the war and the false pretenses of being refugees. Right. So they paid a lot of money to be smuggled to Turkey. Then from Turkey, they took a little raft that, BBC and CNN and blah, blah, blah will present you like Homer's Odyssey and, fighting the unicorns and the Medusa and whatever, right? When in fact, it's just like a little 2-hour trip to the nearest Greek island. Once they got to Greece, they bought fake European passports to then travel to Germany. And as soon as they got to Germany, they flushed those passports down the toilet and claimed asylum, right? So again, this is the crème de la crème. And like you, I'm not worried. I don't think that there are many terrorists amongst violinists from
If
from
that
Syria.
were the case, you'd really have a problem.
Right.
On your hands. That would really be quite something.
But the point remains that they broke the law. Basically,
They were there illegally.
They were there illegally,
Right.
and they were there under false pretenses. Right. But also, it really annoyed the hell out of me that I had once a conversation with a soprano from Syria that he was also trying to push. And I said, look, I'm very conservative. I'm not in favor of this, but you seem to be a nice person. So why not help you, ride the wave of like, wir schaffen das, and, they're not in danger. They're not dangerous. They're in danger, and refugees welcome, and blah, blah, blah. Like ride the wave, ride the identity politics of the left to your advantage. And establish yourself as the Syrian soprano living in Germany or whatever, because you already get plenty of benefits. Yeah. And she's like, what do you mean we get plenty of benefits? Look, all we get is our apartment is paid for, our education is paid for, our insurance, our health insurance is paid for, and we only get like 500 euros to spend. My blood boiled at that moment, and I said, well, guess what? I take it all back. You're an ungrateful pig. You are in my country where I pay so many taxes, and where, God forbid, I pay 50 euros less, I'll have the tax collector like with Robin Hood knocking at my door. And you're complaining that I don't have, that you only get all these things that I don't get as a citizen.
All right, listen. I disagree. Let me tell you why.
Why?
I disagree for the same reason that the guy thinks that the purpose of the fire department is to put out fires. If the people don't like the fact that they're giving all this stuff to refugees, don't let them in.
But I don't. I vote AfD. And when I realized, okay, the Germans are going to continue to self-exploit, I left the country that I love.
Okay, but more people than not agree with it, or you'd have different public policies.
The problem is that the people in Germany, there are two compounded problems. First of all, they all, and I don't think that this is a bad thing, because the Shoah, the Holocaust, was one of the worst episodes in human history, and it should never happen again. Let me very
obviously,
very clear.
Yeah.
It should never.
Well, I mean, obviously, but what is the problem?
They feel so. The Germans feel so much shame and so much guilt over the Holocaust that they are willing to self-immolate.
Okay,
to undo.
Okay, well then it's their fault
to undo.
I mean, they have to be responsible. Yeah, so if you don't like it, then you move. You did what you should have done.
I did what I did.
That's what you should have done if you don't like it.
But what do the Muslims
That's
have
why
to do?
I left Portland.
I know, but what do the Muslims have to do with the Holocaust? They were not the victims of the Holocaust. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The Muslims were the biggest cheerleaders of Hitler. They
Okay,
revered him.
okay,
Because
so that's
they
a
were
separate
happy
question.
that he
Okay,
was doing their dirty job.
okay, pause that question for a second. So more people than not must agree, like the woman is getting what she's doing because of the policies of the country.
Right.
So if they don't like that, then they need to change the policies.
They
This is
should,
not
and-
complicated.
but-
And if someone in the country doesn't like it, then they should leave. And you
yeah.
can leave.
And-
You can go. The EU is a big place.
I know that's why I left.
Well,
I
good.
left
Well,
Germany,
then-
and I adore Germany.
Right.
And I'm very proud of being a German citizen.
I'm here
but-
to tell you in no uncertain terms, if they don't like it, change it.
Yeah, well, we're trying, but then you have the media and the globalist entities and US aid, right? USAID.
Oh, that's
funding-
being cut.
Yeah, I know, but under the Democrats, funding all these media enterprises, convincing Germans that the AfD is a Nazi party. It's not. It originally was a Eurosceptic party that was simply tired of paying the broken dishes of the pigs of Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain.
Germany pays
right?
disproportionately.
Disproportionately. Why should we all be working so that the Greeks don't pay taxes and laugh about it in our faces? It's not sound policy. Then came the immigration, and again, we have this problem with people feeling guilty over the Holocaust, and we have to let everybody in, not knowing or oblivious to the fact that this culture is completely incompatible with ours. And like, do you know who Wafa Sultan is?
Yes.
Like Wafa Sultan said, like Huntington was wrong. It's not a clash of civilizations. Civilizations don't compete. They don't clash. They compete for hegemony. And this civilization is willing to replace us.
Okay, well then whose fault is that?
The Germans, of
Okay,
course,
well,
it's the
then
Germans.
you're
But then
making
you
my
have
point.
then you have Germans who want to do the right thing by their country and their countrymen and their civilization, who vote AfD and who are browbeaten every day at every opportunity. And then you have the opportunists of the CDU, which is exactly what happened right now during our snap elections, where Merz says, we are in agreement actually, and we will end illegal immigration, and we will curb illegal immigration, we will begin deportations, blah, blah, blah. And literally, within 24 hours that they were voted in as the number one party, with the AfD now finally being the second party, Merz says, we lied, we have no intention of doing this.
Yeah, I didn't follow that. Let's say.
A lot of Germans voted for CDU because they thought it's okay. The AfD is Nazi, so let's vote for the CDU that is institutionalized and it's palatable, based on what we think is good for us. But they voted based on a lie. And the reality is now that, according to the latest polls, and this is why I disagree with you that we have to just pay the jizya and become dhimmis in our own countries. The reality is that if we had new elections right now, today, the AfD would win. And this is what the polls are showing.
Well, I'm going to give you the reality. Unless you negotiate your surrender now, it's going to get a lot worse. And the terms of surrender are going to be a lot worse in the future.
I don't know. I think...
but I hope I'm wrong.
I hope so too. And
like Trump's tariffs, I hope I'm wrong.
And that's why, I'm leading here the Reconquista from America, to trying to convince people to wake up and grow a spine, grow a pair of balls, and fight for our countries and fight for our civilization.
And I wish you the best of luck. And the lowest of low-hanging fruit is to stop illegal immigration.
I agree.
If you can just do that, there's some hope of change.
Yeah.
Until you can do it, let's talk about your surrender.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the reason for the Reconquista. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Really so thankful for your time and for your insights. And
Appreciate
I'm so happy to have had you here as a guest.
Thanks. I appreciate
both
it.
Of
Very
my
kind of
podcast
you.
and of my home. And thank
Very
you
kind.
infinitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thanks.